Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining today. Today I am going to have a discussion with someone who likes communism and likes to discuss philosophy. He is the founder of HyperBridge, a really cool blockchain bridging technology. And you can maybe give us a little bit of an overview of what that is. He goes by Web3 Philosopher on X. And recently when Vitalik posted Make Communism Great Again, we got into a tiny little discussion and I asked him, hey, do you want to come on my podcast and discuss? I've been looking for someone who wanted to discuss this topic with me. So it's great to have you. How do I say your name? And could you tell us a little bit about what you work on?
Yeah, sure. My name is Seun Lanlege, but people prefer to call me Sean, so that's okay. I am the co-founder of HyperBridge, and HyperBridge is secure bridging technology. For the first time, we've been able to bring the verification of cross-chain messages on-chain, where they are fully trustlessly verified and can be consumed by different kinds of applications, whether that's EVM, whether that's also alternative VMs, which we are also working on and bringing support for. Yeah, basically about me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And we both work in crypto. And so I think this is we have kind of like a common ground for having this conversation. So could you maybe give me like, what is your perspective on communism and capitalism? I don't know where you're from originally, but like in the US, in the school system, we are taught like communism is a bad system. Capitalism is really great. It's like how America, gets rich and stuff like that. Maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your perspective. And like, how do you think about communism and capitalism?
So, I was first introduced to communism in the university. I started reading a lot, especially a lot of philosophy. One of my favorite, I would say, essays, Simulacra and Simulation by Jean Baudrillard, and then, of course, the so-called Communist Manifesto. Um, I think a lot of people, when they refer to communism, they're actually referring to authoritarian governments or totalitarian governments, even worse. And this is not actually what communism means. Communism calls for the complete abolishment of the state. So, how can you have an authoritarian government and call it communist? This is actually a kind of oxymoron, if you ask me. And so, if we are to discuss the idea of a society that doesn't have a state, and mind you, the state's entire function is to protect private property, but now we no longer have private property. So we also no longer, by extension, need the states to do this to perform that function. Um, then that's a completely different conversation. But if it's like communism as like, what was done in Stalin's era or what's been done in North Korea, even China, I disagree that this is communism.
Mm-hmm. And so, what about it though is appealing to you? Because I remember the first time I heard about it, someone was like, "Look, imagine if everyone got everything that they need, nothing more, nothing less, something along those lines." And I personally, that never resonated with me. I didn't even think that sounded particularly good. I like the idea of a meritocracy where there is a competitive aspect, and you can kind of actually like go through hard times, and you can struggle, and there's like kind of meaning that is derived from that struggle, and then you can, if you work hard and if you get lucky to some extent, it's true. But if you're, if you compete and win, you rise up in the ranks and you actually have more than other people. To me, that's always been a more appealing thing. How do you what about communism is something that has intrigued you?
For me, I'm a techno-utopianist, if that's a word.
Mm-hmm.
And if we follow techno-utopianism, then eventually technology will provide for all of our needs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Technology, human advancement will scale, the means of production of the basic human needs. Previously, clean drinking water used to be something that could only be accessible to a few, but now everyone has access to clean drinking water. I don't think communism is the complete removal of competition and the complete, um, or rather maybe complete satisfaction of everyone's needs at all times. This is not possible. Um,
Right.
what communism calls for is actually the redistribution of the means of production. So mostly land and potentially, factories and minerals and natural resources that should actually belong to the collective. I agree with you that yes, people should strive for things because a life without
Mm-hmm.
striving is meaningless ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
I think people conflate the idea that in communism you wouldn't have any kind of striving, which is not correct. You can still have a striving. You can still have a better life or standard of living than some people who choose not to do anything. But it's that the resources that would allow you to strive are freely available to everyone. Some people will, of course, want this. Some people will, of course, not want this. I still think there will be homeless people under communism. Um, it depends on kind of how you view society. Do you view society as something that should optimize for the betterment and for the well-being of of the individuals in society, or should we allow society to become captured and become and be under the thumb of a few elite people who are able to play this game of capitalism pretty well? Um, yeah, I mean, it comes down to like that difference of opinion.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think we can, I think we would probably have some disagreements if we were going to go down the rabbit hole of exactly like what is wrong with a few people controlling a lot of resources and stuff like that. But before we go down that rabbit hole, I really like that you're techno-utopist, like techno-optimist, whatever you want to call it. I think that's really cool. I've thought about this a lot as well. And one thing that I really noticed is, so I kind of went down, like you in college were going, you kind of were reading communism. I was going down this radical libertarianism route. And I don't know, I no longer actually hold that perspective, but it has influenced me a lot in like just like a lot of the way that I think about things. And one thing that I realized thinking about like communism and libertarianism, and like what I'm talking about specifically is I know there are like left libertarians who could also be considered like communists, but I mean like Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism as opposed to, anarcho-communism. One thing that I thought is really interesting is if we do have this techno-utopian view, like let's take the current technology to its logical conclusion. Like virtual reality gets really good. We are able to like simulate everything that we need. We're able to provide like nourishment and everything that everybody needs, kind of like a basic thing. And basically technology, it could not even be virtual reality per se, but technology is basically able to provide everything that anyone could ever want, including like experiences, including living in a castle, including any car you want, any like it's easy to imagine this in virtual reality, even though some people may view that as slightly dystopian. But let's just run with this for a sec. Imagine that you could have a lifelike simulated like experience for any sort of life that you want with basically no material constraints because there's enough computational power and capability to actually just simulate the environment around every single person and do it in the way that they want. Um, in that world, there is kind of like this horseshoe theory where both like a very like a right-wing libertarian and a left-wing kind of anarcho-communism, whatever type of word you want to use, these almost converge because in a sense there is no longer scarcity of material goods. So that is the basis for property rights, is actually deciding who uses these scarce materials. And if there is no scarcity, then there's no need for property rights. And on the other hand, libertarians are very focused on this idea of non-aggression. And let's just say in cyberspace, in a simulated environment, aggression doesn't hold the same meaning because if you, like, for example, die in the simulation, you don't die in real life. So you could, in theory, like commit violence against somebody, and that wouldn't be such a cardinal sin as it is in the real world. With adequate technology, you could still do these acts. Maybe that's the rules of the environment that you're in. Either it's not possible to even do that in the first place, or it is possible and the consequences are not as bad. So both of these things kind of you do kind of see a convergence where there is like this abundance, there's no property rights, and we don't have to worry about a lot of the concerns that libertarians often have with how we should structure society. Do you agree with that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think we should go in the opposite direction, and rather, considering this virtual cyberspace, we should
Sure.
consider the real world,
Hmm.
where we now have AI and automation that are able to essentially automate our manufacturing and automate, our research and automate our discovery processes, and is able to go out into space and bring back all the necessary materials to manufacture everything that everyone needs. In
Hmm.
this reality, there it becomes no need for private property,
Hmm.
right? Because if and this is where I think capitalism becomes a problem, is that capitalism, if you read Janusz Varoufakis, he says, capitalism manufactures artificial scarcity. It needs to manufacture artificial scarcity so that the elites can continue to be at the top of society. Um, and in a world where only a few people have this abundance, while the rest of us are left with artificial scarcity, it's basically the plot for a purge kind of scenario, right? Because the poor will obviously grow discontent, and there can only be stability where everyone has access to the same resources.
Right. And so what kind of resources do people need to have access to? Like give me more about like why is this so important? So I understand, like, I don't want to see a single person starving to death in the entire world. Let's agree on that. But and maybe that's the fundamental thing that capitalism cannot do. We could have that debate if you want to make that argument. I don't agree with that. But like, what are the resources that, for example, let's say a poor person is lacking
I think it's
that.
going to be an ever expanding list of things. Unfortunately, it's not going to be, I mean, right now it's land, and right now it's food, and water, access to healthcare. These are considered the basics. But as
Mhm.
technology through automation expands, it's it makes sense that these advancements be shared with the rest of the world, or not.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
agree with that. But let's. I want to like be careful to divide this into two separate conversations, depending on how we're thinking about this. So let me know how you want to tackle this. So there are like the very global poor, and this is a very different conversation versus like we can think of within one society. So there, like how like what is the it's just these are two very separate topics. So I don't want to get these two things confused. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I don't want to go down this road. Like I just want to like put that note there before we continue talking that we could be talking about this in two different ways. So I would like to first maybe focus on like within a single country as an example. So these people are with they're not like there's not like some people living on $1 a day and then there's also people living on $100,000 a day in another country, right? And not comparing those because that's a slightly different conversation. We can have it. It's not. I'm not like giving up on that. I'm just saying maybe for the sake, and most people they think about the country that they live in when they think about politics. So this might resonate more with people within a country. So there is a spectrum, but there is also there are you know the living standard. There's like a base living standard for people that people have, and it's within a certain range. In that context, like how is land limiting people? I could get land very cheap if I just go somewhere that other people aren't and other people don't want to be, right? Like this is like there's plenty of open space on the planet. So why is land something that is lacking, and how could you possibly solve that? Because for example, let's say everybody wants to be in New York City. Everybody can't be in New York City. Everybody can't own land in New York City. There's the geography of land inherently. There is this inherent scarcity where there is the like Metropolitan Museum of Arts or Central Park, right? There's only so much land that's adjacent to Central Park. It's literally impossible to divide that amongst people. And there is this kind of like this network effect where people want to be in a place where they have access to other people, and you can't. There's nothing you could ever do to democratize that. It's just simply not possible. What do you like? How are you thinking about that?
So land, in regards to accommodation and living spaces, is I think not something like you just pointed out that can be equally shared. Of course, there will be some locations that are prime, and of course, in the world, in any kind of sensible society, they come with extra costs. Maybe not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily monetary. Maybe if you do other kinds of services to get them, maybe you contribute your research, you contribute your knowledge to society, whatever the case may be. The land that I'm referring to is land for the means of production. So, for instance, farmland. Um, Farmland is very scarce. There's not a lot of arable land in the world, and you can see how it would be a problem if only a few people had access to that land. And
Mm-hmm.
so, in a communist society, this land would be portioned up and would be leased out to people. So it's not like you have ownership of the land; you're just given a time slot, and you can, till the land, and whatever you get, it's yours, and you just have to pass it on. And I think this is already being done in China, in some parts of China, where the villages or the villagers essentially share a piece of land, and if
Mm-hmm.
people move out, then the land is sort of returned to the collective. And this is a much more, I would say, scalable way for building society. Now, not everyone is going to want to be a farmer, mind you. We all have different interests, but at the very least, like if you couldn't make it in Broadway, for instance, you could at least get some land and farm and contribute to society using your farming skills.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think the kind of the way you're talking, it reminds me of like a kind of like a 20th century mindset where they're kind of talking about these things that just are not problems that much in the world right now. Like, I just don't think that there's like a lack of farming capacity. And yeah, I guess we can talk about certain places in the world where progress hasn't caught up, and so like we can have that conversation, like that's a slightly different conversation. But we can have it. But what I'd say is like, first of all, like, so my cousin, he was going through a really hard time, really hard time. He had no money. He was just the low point of his life. He was able to go work on a farm. It was the only job he could get at the time. And he went and he was like, "Hey, can I have some money so I can like get to my job?" And so we, I had this conversation with him. And so farming is available to people. And I I get what you're saying. Like you can own the farmland, but I don't really see at the point where like that he was there. Like I don't see how that really would have made much of a difference. I mean, that actually would have been probably too difficult to manage farmland efficiently. But like working in farming, this is something that's available to people. So, and similarly, I think like at least like within America, and maybe we can talk about different countries if you'd prefer. But like if you wanted to buy farmland and you wanted to get farmland, you wanted land to use for industrial purposes, that's available. You can have land. Like there's so much land, and in many other countries as well. There's plenty of land. You can get it. It's super cheap. It's super easy. Almost anybody could access it. It's just you couldn't actually get to the land and use it productively because it's not close to anything. Like that's the fundamental constraint on land. And there's other issues with land. Like don't get me wrong, but I think the reason, like there is this inherent scarcity in land that must be there because the location of the land is extremely important. And so, like, if I wanted to make a factory, there is land that, even as someone without a lot of resources, I could make a factory. The issue is getting to the land, getting the factory supplies to the land. The infrastructure is not there. And it's just like, like if there's a large cluster of people in New York City, I can't have my factory be all the way up in like the tundra of Canada, right? We wouldn't be able to get there. You wouldn't be able to get labor. You wouldn't be able to get your capital over there. So and just the commute would just be ridiculous, right? So it's I don't see how that's a very like I don't see how that's the limiting factor. I think there is the limiting factor in land is its geography, and that fundamentally cannot be divided very much.
I mean, I totally agree with you. I already agreed with you in my points, but I'm simply giving an anecdotal example here as to this idea of common resources for
Mm-hmm.
the commune.
Mm-hmm.
Land is just an example here.
Right.
Um, I think the key issue for me that makes communism a much more sustainable society is that you don't have this divide between the haves and the have-nots, which historically has always led to a collapse. Now,
Hmm.
the whole point of communism was to resolve that cycle of collapse between the haves and the have-nots, which has been a historical issue. In a way that we can now have a society that is able to grow into the future without any kind of structural problems in its makeup. Um,
Hmm.
I think another thing that's also very important to note is that communism and capitalism are actually mutually exclusive. They cannot coexist on the same planet. Capitalism is expansionism, it's imperialism, right?
Hmm.
Or on the other hand, communism has less of these features and is more concerned with the I would say the well-being of every single person in the commune and the efficient allocation of resources
Hmm.
without the states, mind you, which is also another problem that hasn't been solved. Like, how do you have a society without central authority and central planning? This has never really been done before, which is why there's a running joke on the internet that real communism has never been tried before.
Yeah. Okay, I see. So are you making the claim that we don't know how to do communism essentially? Like in theory, there's this good idea, but there's no one has a plan that would work for it. Is that what you're saying?
I haven't seen any good implementation for communism. I think it's a good idea, especially when we reach post-scarcity.
Hmm.
But it's like, okay, if there is no state, then how are disputes resolved? These are all issues that we will definitely need to sit down about and think about. But I also think that there's opportunity for crypto and blockchains to somehow mediate this stateless society where, in fact, agreements are enforced on chain, using immutable contracts and immutable code. That's a potential solution, but it remains to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So what do you define as the state? Like how do you think about that?
The state essentially is the institution or organization that has the monopoly on violence.
Hmm. Okay. And how exactly, okay, I mean, I get you're saying basically there's not, you don't know of a way to not have that. That makes sense. So I also am curious about this comment you made where you think that capitalism and communism can't coexist globally. So like, let's say that the Western hemisphere was capitalist and the Eastern hemisphere was communist. You think that that's not a stable equilibria? Like what happens there? Does capitalism subvert communism in that case, or what
Exactly.
exactly
It's like rock,
happens?
paper, scissors. Capitalism beats communism. Capitalism has central planning, has central authority. Communism doesn't. So, people really cannot organize on a very large scale. You can't have a military. Military requires central command. So
Hmm.
you obviously that's gone. So basically, you're just sitting ducks. If you actually had real communism.
I see. So, but wouldn't that imply that it's not a sustainable or stable system? If any subgroup of the system decides to diverge from the plan, then the whole thing collapses and gets subverted. That to me seems like a pretty unstable system and doesn't sound like a good idea.
I mean, it depends on what you call unstable. I mean, the whole
Mhm.
point of communism is to resolve the instability that arises from capitalism. And of course, yes, everyone kind of has to follow the rules. I would say it also requires a sort of maturing of the human consciousness to the sort of emancipation of human consciousness from aggression and from um, competition and from status symbols. Um, these things will definitely need to change before human beings can really adopt communism. But until these things change, I don't think it's a. I think it will just continue to be a fascination for philosophers and researchers.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. And so would you say that like, do you believe in like biological determinism? Like, do you believe that, the way that like a lot of things are like everything is physical. Everything is a scientific process basically that then like even our actions like we aren't necessarily choosing things. Maybe we have this experience of free will, but really it's our biology. Like, and we can even go a little deeper and say like there's Darwinian forces that make genes that make us grow in a certain way, where we have like neurological chemical processes in our brain that are all part of us as organisms that cause us to make choices. Is that how you think about like free will and like how is in the mind, or do you have another theory?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, someone asked me this question, like, do human beings have free will? And I
Mm,
gave them an answer, and they weren't really too sure about the answer. So I'm going to give the answer here again and see if you can make sense of it. Essentially, it's that like to have free will is to have all the knowledge, is to have all the information.
mm,
And
mm,
you might say, well, no, that's just omniscience. Actually, no, it's not. It's free will. What people conflate free will is like, okay, having freedom of choice. But if your information is limited, if the options presented to you have been concealed, then you don't really have choice, right? It's like people who watch TV all the time and they think they have some model of society, like Plato's allegory of the cave. They don't have any free will, and so there definitely is an interplay between biological determinism as well as the information diet, uh,
mm.
yeah, that you take in, and so these two things determine your choices ultimately and your actions.
Right. I like that. That makes a lot of sense. I think that like a lot of the physicists I listen to, they talk about how much information you have does play a huge role in like actually the laws of physics themselves. I'm not an expert on it, so I won't go deeper, but that's a very interesting. Um, One of the things, so okay, but I guess kind of like what I'm getting at though is like regardless, like let's take the your information and environment, like let's hold that constant, and then let's just say like what is happening when you make decisions. Would you agree that that's like a genetic thing, essentially something that is determined by your biology? Yes, how your biology developed in the environment based on the information as inputs, but then ultimately it was kind of like derived from a genetic source, and that there's not like some other like soul or some other like
Oh
super
no, no,
physical
definitely
process. You don't
not.
believe in that?
Definitely not. I'm an empiricist.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess kind of like one of the things though that then I feel like there's like a hint of like I don't know, like not, I don't know what the term would be, but not antinatalism, but almost like in a sense you're kind of criticizing humanity as a species and saying that we need a different species because in a sense, right, there's like this genetic component to what we do. We have these tendencies. This is a very deep rooted, like at least as far as I'm aware of the science, this is like a very deep rooted. These are deep rooted psychological phenomena, and these are they come as part of the way that our psyche is structured. And this is like a scientific thing. And you can even look at, like for example, like Jordan Peterson. You can make fun of him about talking about lobsters, but he talks about how even these other species that we kind of evolved from and split from like very long ago, they also have similar social structures and like goals and desires, and they form the similar hierarchies and stuff like that. So in a
I mean,
sense,
except
like,
for
yeah, go on.
I was going to say except for bonobos, but yeah, no, I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm also transhumanist, so I think that at some point we will need to re rewrite our genetics and rewrite our consciousness to adapt to the new kind of society because essentially we've been carrying the same biological makeup for the past thousands of years, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit limiting, especially in the information age where we're now exposed to more information than anyone a few thousand years ago would have been exposed to, and it tells in the way like attention spans are going down, right? Like our bodies are just not adapted to the way that technology is changing, so we
I
will
agree.
actually need to also update the hardware.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess though, like some people may object in principle to anything that like basically means that human Homo sapiens are no longer a species, and kind of like we need this new species. But I get, okay, you're transhumanist, makes sense. Let's say that we're saying, okay, so now we're in 2025, the year 2025. We are here. We're not gonna. I mean, we can, use technology, but what direction should we go? It seems to me like you're not really taking a view on that. You think there is an interesting possibility, as we have more technology, we can do new things, but right now we don't have the technology and we don't have the plan. Like we don't have there's not been a philosopher that's laid out a good plan for how to do this.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we're all just kind of stumbling through it. In the interim, capitalism is doing a great job. I think of capitalism
Okay.
as a kind of hyper intelligence,
Yes.
um, being this thing that actually is composed of smaller intelligent agents, and they're all incentivized to come together and build things and do things, Starship, the iPhone, NVIDIA chips, what have you. This is a great way to grow society, but eventually capitalism is going to need to handle.
Oh man.
Oh, I hear you, still, but I guess your AirPods died.
Yeah, my AirPods dead. Yeah, and I don't have any other like headphones. Sorry.
Oh, okay. If so, you're not going to be able to hear the rest of the conversation. So we can stop now.
Yeah, I think we should. Oh wait, you
Okay.
can hear me right now.
I can hear you. Yeah.
Oh, that's my mic actually. But let's
Oh,
maybe stop now, and we can. I'd definitely love to continue at some point in the future. If that's okay.
yeah. I'd love to. Yeah. Let's do a part two. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll have you back on, and we'll continue this conversation. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Bye.